Hey, everybody, and thanks for joining us. We're here to talk about cybersecurity implications of the Russia-Ukraine war. And for many of you, you were here for the first one of these we did at the very beginning. And obviously, there have been some major things that have happened since the beginning. One of them, of course, being the White House, the Biden statement that everybody needs to be on their toes because of some evidence that that Russia is planning something. So, when that happened, or at least considering planning something in the cyber arena. So, of course, when that happened, we said, okay, it's time for us to do another one, which we said we would do in the first one. We said if events warrant, we'll come back and do another one of these. And so, welcoming back the same folks here. As you can see in the chat, since many of you have been here before, let us know where you're from. We appreciate having you back here. Before we get started, one important thing to note is, we're here to talk about the cybersecurity implications of the Russia-Ukraine war. There are humanitarian implications. There are political implications. Those sometimes cross over into the cyber arena, but we're here to focus on the cybersecurity implications. If anybody would like a list of charities or anything that that are working with the refugees or working on those, let us know. There are some who we know and can vouch for. But just so we know what we're focusing on, it's the cybersecurity implications. So the slide was not advancing is what was happening there. That was very exciting. Oh, and it went back. Isn't that exciting? All right. The chat's on the right. We talked about that. You can mute the chat if you want, and we'll show you how to do that. Everybody here will get a recording. If you registered for this, it'll send you a recording. If it doesn't send you a recording, because systems are not always perfect, email me, jake@criticalinsight.com, and we'll kick you over a YouTube link after it uploads and everything. What we're going to do is talk about what we know. We're going to talk about how to prepare. We're going to talk about what's changed. Here's how you mute the notifications. You click enter full screen on the bottom. You select more. You then select notifications, and that's if select notifications. That's if you're getting the bleep 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 on the right, and then exit.
How does it go?
It goes up there. People can see.
Bleep bleep bleep. Okay,
that's how it goes. Beep beep beep. Okay. So who are we? Critical Insight defends critical services against cyber attacks. We're their security operations center. We provide consulting services, and our goal is to help all critical services prepare for, detect, and respond to cyber attacks 24/7. We work a lot with Brian Hurd, who's here. Hey, Brian. He is an insurance and cyber intelligence expert. He works at Aon, which bought Strauss Freeburg. He responds to incidents around the world and is great in discussions like these. Mike Hamilton and Fred Langston are both Critical Insight co-founders. Mike's the former CISO of the city of Seattle. Fred's the EVP of professional services and has a giant background in healthcare and public sector consulting, and I'm the event host. My name is Jake Milstein. Again, my email is jake@criticalinsight.com. So if you need anything, shoot me a note, put it in the chat. And with that, Mike, why don't you take us through the important headlines?
Okay, this is always my job because every day we put out the news blast, which is tracking all of this as much as we can. So in our green room conversation before now, war is nasty. There's all kinds of that. So we're going to really try and focus on what we know to be factual rather than saying, and here's the video I saw on Twitter or whatever, because the fog of war is everywhere. Both sides, you can't trust what you see right now. But it's true. The world has been waiting for something's going to happen, and it doesn't appear that anything has happened yet. Although we have some intelligence that says, and this is why the statements have been coming out from the administration through the Office of the President, from CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, from the FBI. They're all singing the same song, and that is because they have intelligence that says something about that. We don't know what that is, but the world is holding its breath right now. We do know what's going on over in Ukraine, not through statements that are made by the Ukrainians, but because there are U.S. companies in there, there are a lot of companies in there that are trying to deconvolve some of these cyber attacks. And what they're finding is the Russians are using wipers. And, I think there's a lot of people that are terrified of this coming to land on our doorstep too. Brian, in your incident response capability, I know you're out there working with some of the biggest victims there are. Have you seen any of this yet?
Yes, the kinds of, and thank you everybody for joining us today, and thanks to Critical Insight for putting this together. And I want to just reflect, yeah, war is illegal by its very nature and horrible. What we're seeing from companies is the fact that first they were concerned about the health and welfare of their employees, and I helped actually some companies do things like that. Then they were worried about the potential loss of control of intellectual property in the Ukraine. A lot of great Ukraine had a very robust, and does, and I hope will again, software development for some of the world's largest online gambling gaming companies and other companies. So the big concerns started there, and then the whole stray voltage or these weapons of war targeted Ukraine, like that hit Maersk, coming out of the conflict zone because they have a unit there is a big concern. And then we get into supply chains and other things. But we can get into those as we go through the question and answer, Mike. But yeah, we're seeing all those levels of concerns, starting with the safety and welfare of humans, then on to what do I have in that country? How does that impact my organization?
Yeah, so like a wiper killware used against a hospital means there is no recovery from that. You rebuild from scratch. You
it's ransomware without
form the ashes back into a network again. This business about Anonymous continues. And so they just hacked the central bank of Russia. They've gone after the Russian space agency. They hacked printers across the country to print out, what they would call anti-disinformation messaging. They have hacked cameras across the country and put their messages on the live feed of the cameras, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, here's the central bank, and it's starting to look like Russia's really getting irritated at this. And we consider Russian hackers to be affiliated with the state. And here's a bunch of hackers, and this is more than 400,000 people across the globe doing this. Some of them have very small parts. I'll just use my phone to send text messages to a phone number in Russia that they give me, right? But some of these acts are getting very close to, we'll say, kinetic. And so this is just something to keep an eye on. This could be used as a pretext to fire back, right? And we may not be holding our breath for Putin's cyber war much longer. So the Russian military, yes, they hacked into satellites. Brian, in your military background, it's amazing to me that communications didn't go worse, that they really didn't smash communications in the whole country. But yeah, they did do European satellites, and that does affect satellite-based internet all over Europe. We know, it has been well known that actors have been very persistent to try and gain access to our energy infrastructure. In fact, when I worked for the city of Seattle, we uncovered an effort by Chinese actors to penetrate the energy utilities, Seattle City Light, and went and talked to the FBI about it and said, we think this is because China hacked Google, and Google makes power, and they lifted all this info for the power marketers. And they said, well, we can't really confirm that. So we know this has been going on for a long time. Well, now we just charged a couple of people that have been targeting U.S. oil refineries. And again, right, global campaign of energy cyber attacks. Fred, I know that you've run into some of this. Brian, I know that you run into this fairly routinely. Do we think that this is, the trigger is ready to pull in our energy infrastructure? Because every time we read about one of these, if we know about it, that means we're kicking them out.
Fred, over to you first. I'll be cleanup batter.
Fred, you're on mute.
Sorry, folks. There's also great cover for everyone else, like the Chinese or the North Koreans or everyone else, to start taking advantage of the fog of war here and committing their own types of attacks. So I think not only you have to worry about, the Russians coming back at us, but I think you need to worry about the Chinese, the North Koreans, pretty much anybody that's got some geopolitical bone to pick with the U.S. is going to be taking advantage of what's happening right now. So
That's a great
I
point.
think I think that's one of the big fears here. It's not just the Russians.
Agreed. And to back and expand that remark is, take the time and energy you're doing to do these looks for problems or shoring up your defenses as part of your overall continuing resiliency at banks and in infrastructure. Because while it's great, never waste a crisis, as we've always said in the government. When I founded the cyber counter espionage, cyber counterterrorism department in the Navy 30 years ago, it was a problem then. It's still a problem now. Use this opportunity to do things we're talking about, but not just because there happens to be a battle in the Ukraine. There are many people targeting you every single day.
Okay, Jake, enough headlines.
All right. Hey, one thing I want to go back to, which is the anonymous hack central bank of Russia and leaked 28 gigabytes of data. One of the things that we had talked about previously was, these 400,000 people who have formed the Ukraine IT army. One of the things that we were worried about was that they would do something that created a real problem. Have you seen have you seen that actually happen yet, Mike?
Well, they had tried to take over a gas line, and were dangerously, with the way the story goes, they were dangerously close to overpressurizing it, and an operator in Russia prevented that from happening. So that would have been the first shot. They also hacked the space agency, which got somebody from the military to come out and speak to them directly and say hacking satellites is an act of war. So, I don't think that the explosion has happened yet. We've gotten dangerously close to that. But some of the things that are going on now, they're really releasing a lot of documents. And as people pour over that stuff, you find out all these financial transactions that need to be explained and where money actually goes. And it's really embarrassing. And if I was in a position in a company or in a country and there was this big corrupt economy and money was getting stashed all over the place, I'd be pretty worried about documents like that coming out. So there's the blow something up. There's also the tick them off enough to where they're going to react the same way.
Interesting. So, I do, we did say last time that there were three possibilities of things that would happen. Possibility number one, a supply chain attack results in global collateral damage. Number two, Russian criminal gangs attack on behalf of Russia. And number three, U.S. critical infrastructure is attacked. So now that we've been through a couple weeks here, let's go through these and talk about what's happened. So supply chain attack results in global collateral damage. That happened with NotPetya. Has that happened yet, Brian?
What we're seeing is a lot of the weapons that are being used in theater are having impact on companies and organizations in theater. A lot of companies have learned to firewall off their Ukrainian or nearby subsidiaries to stop the stray voltage coming up, like it hit Maersk, like it hit others. As was mentioned in the chats, we're seeing 0 days come out related to their use in the wild to this or other similar conflicts. So we're seeing the starts of it. The issue is the spark of a global is when something gets out of region. The Tomahawk missile suddenly goes awry. And that's what we're all monitoring for. The other thing that we all talked about in the green room was the rush to judgment of anything else that happens being related to this. Right. There are still tsunamis in the world that aren't caused by this event. So please don't don't worry so much about where it came from. Worry about its impact on your organization, and you'll stay out of the political fray.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that in a little
Yep.
bit here about, you know, the other things that have happened. The Russian criminal gangs attacking on behalf of Russia. You know, Mike, we've seen
Well,
some.
back up a little bit, because this whole thing about, you know, the big supply chain attack, I just want to say exactly to Brian's point, other stuff happens, might look like it, and we got to be careful how we rush to judgment, right? So this Lapsus gang so last week, and probably starting about 10 days ago, there's a whole bunch of stories. Okta has been hacked. They provide multi-factor authentication technology to everybody. Microsoft got hacked, source code released for Azure. We say, oh my God, it's the Russians. It's the supply chain attack. Every Microsoft customer, every Okta customer is now at risk. No, it turned out to be a bunch of British teenagers doing it, who are incredibly sloppy, have already been busted. So that rush to judgment, we are not seeing what looks like a supply chain attack that could affect, you know, hundreds of thousands of customers of a single company. But stuff is happening that looks like that, and we got to be careful.
And one final thought, and then we'll get into the criminal gang version of this, is I used to run defensive operations and offensive operations. What I can say is, in any military, any established military from a nation state, there are controls over what is targeted for future attack and what is authorized for the release of weaponry. In our side, especially, however, even with respect to the way they structure their military, the Russians. So the laws of armed conflict and picking your targets for effect still apply, even though the Russians are being evil, even though Putin's a despot, whatever. But there is some controls in place. As we transition to the second bullet, the unaffiliated people jumping into the middle of an international war do not have that kind of thought about what's the impact on the populace for what they're doing. And that's dangerous when amateurs play war. And so I'll both to address that first bullet about what Russia may do unexpectedly or what other people are doing every day. That's where I differentiate those two.
It's worth adding too that the Russians learned a lot from NotPetya. That was not meant to have escaped the boundaries of Ukraine. It was meant to be focused entirely in Ukraine, yet it impacted the entire world. They learned a lot in that operation. So you're probably not going to see the Russians making the same mistakes unless that's the intended consequence. But certainly the criminal gangs don't give a darn. And that's where the mess is going to be.
Well, and I'm speaking of those criminal gangs. I mean, we're seeing, as we see here, an uptick, right, Mike?
Yep. So I know, because we can publicly, you know, report in summary what we see with our Pisces customers, right? This is the free monitoring for small governments that we use to teach university students. Yeah, we see the uptick. There is a whole lot of probing going on. There are single addresses that are hitting multiple Pisces customers. So we see this going on. The banks have reported this. They say there's an 8-fold uptick in Russian-based phishing. So yeah, this is happening. And you know, again, it's not hard to understand why. Those sanctions hurt. This is a source of revenue, and they need money. So, I mean, yeah, there's the retaliatory part of it too. That needs to be very carefully nuanced, right? But this whole thing, we've always lived with cyber criminals steal money. And so when it happens, we're not that surprised. What we don't typically see is, oh, the energy grid just failed. All right, to our third bullet point that we're coming up here. So, you know, the uptick in criming and, you know, potentially some other acts that are disguised to look like crime. Yeah, that's all ticking up.
Hey, and speaking of being disguised, Nathan puts in the chat here, you know, small credit union here. We've seen a downturn in port scanning from Russia, but an uptick in phishing attacks. You know, those phishing attacks is what you're talking about. And I'll bet you have something to say about that port scanning.
Yeah. Look for the uptick in port scanning from domestic sources.
Yeah. The Russians, and again, speaking with 30 years,
it's coming from AWS.
Nobody can tell which operation I'm talking about. Most of the time when I found actual Russian espionage agents, and I found a ton of them, they weren't coming from Russian IPs. Right. They knew to move infrastructure, and they knew to move it terrestrially into the country of target. So I and again, Lance, awesome inputs. I think you're going to see maybe a downtick from Russia because everybody's looking that way. You're going to see the criminal groups and the other countries not currently on the news love when we're paying attention to something else. That's their time to really get some stuff done. And that's why you're seeing a lot of this uptick. It's not necessarily in support of what Russia's doing. It's because all of you are talking about what Russia's doing, and they're going to now take advantage of the confusion to commit crimes or for China to steal other stuff.
And Fred, you've seen this. I mean, it's, somebody puts in the chat here, Usman puts, maybe they're using US VPN servers, but it's more than that, right?
Well, it's just what Brian was alluding to. They're going to avoid a bunch of the controls like geolocation that keeps you from sending in scans or attacks from outside the country. You're going to move your operations, frankly, as close to the target as possible, because that's what you want to do. And frankly, you're going to miss a lot of the cross-border scanning that the Homeland Security and government likes to do. That all gets missed. So this has been tradecraft for 20 plus years to move as closely as possible. So seeing things coming from Russia is probably not much of an indicator of anything. In fact, you would expect it to probably drop off because shields are up everywhere now. Why would they be coming from IPs in Russia at this point?
And I think there has been, I mean, this is a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, but I talked to a lot of local governments. We're just going to geo-block Russia. Good luck with that because they're coming out of AWS. So
yeah, I mean, is it even a recommended step anymore?
It cuts out the ankle biters,
Right.
It doesn't hurt, but just don't be deluded into thinking that it's going to be effective.
And Mike, I think you bring up, and Fred, thank you. Like two things to remark on Fred's stuff. You have to remember, if it's really Russian military and intelligence, the KGB has had front companies, sleeper agents around the planet doing this since the beginning of their existence. So they can, whole front companies and people placed around the world. And to Mike's point, it absolutely is a longitudinal issue about resilience and the fact that, we need to be prepared about these types of events all the time. So absolutely. And those are two great things to remark on as we get into this phase.
Yeah, and so back to what's on the screen here, we said, that there were three possibilities, right? Number one was supply chain attack results in global collateral damage. Number two, Russian criminal gangs attack on behalf of Russia. Number three, U.S. critical infrastructures attack. The first time we did this webinar, we said, that's probably not going to happen. What just happened was the Biden administration said, well, everybody shields up because it might, and they and then in a call with CISA, which usually isn't public, but then CISA went ahead and posted it online. They named some sectors: energy sector, water, financial institutions. Were listed there as the sectors that maybe intelligence was talking about, right, Mike?
Yes, I'm just going to say yes, because I was chatting here and I didn't catch the entire question. But
so so we're talking about U.S. critical infrastructure being, that's a possibility that they could be attacked, and that CISA named some sectors to be focused on.
Right. So yeah, it's energy, it's transportation, and it's communications. Right. Those three right there would do the biggest harm to the economy, and that's why those are the ones that are under a special microscope here. They also, as FEMA also talks a lot, if you've worked in kind of the ecosystem of emergency management, that there's this phenomenon called cascading effects. All right. So, hey, our bank, we're solid. We got all our cyber controls in place. Everything's great. We're out of power for a month. Well, okay. Well, you're dead. Your bank is dead, So that's really why the critical infrastructure was deemed a critical infrastructure. I'd say the other one, this goes to my earlier remark, communications. Because no communication, there is no tweeting from the president of Ukraine. That message cannot get out, right? So communications tends to be kind of the top of the hit list as well in an actual war. I don't think the communications infrastructure is going to get disrupted here. That's just my thought. But the satellite internet companies in the EU were attacked specifically, but to shut out those communications. So, that's a possibility as well. And then there's transportation. And I would posit that the largest economic exposure to the United States is the now damaged supply chain, but the goods coming in and out of maritime ports. That's trillions of dollars worth of economic activity coming in and out of the ports. You shut that down, that's a sanction against us. So yeah, these are the critical sectors that are the ones that are worth watching, and these are the ones that CISA is very focused on right now.
And Brian and Fred, I think this is a really, really important question here. A lot there. I see who the folks in the audience are. We have folks from healthcare, we have folks from energy, we have folks from cities and counties, financial institutions. Last time we said, okay, maybe not so likely U.S. critical infrastructure is attacked. Now there's the warning from the Biden administration. Brian, then Fred, do you think the chance of an attack on critical infrastructure from Russia is higher now?
So in context, I used to work for the National Counterterrorism Center running the no-fly and other physical and critical infrastructure protection things too before I came out here. So in context, the announcement you saw about them charging the Russians for various things, that was pre-battle type stuff. They're always looking at the fragility of our infrastructure for a future conflict. And somebody posted in here that the attacks may come from other countries. Yeah, they have infrastructure around the world. The other thing is they're always looking at everybody's infrastructure. They have ongoing hacks around Britain's infrastructure, or Germany's, or France's, or name your country, because someday they might want to take it down. But this is the differentiator about longitudinal war and like the Cold War. But they're not going to do that randomly and just let missiles fly and push the big red button, because at the end of the day, they realize what that would do. And regimented militaries have somewhat controls in place not to do that. Even the militaries I don't like have controls in place not to do that. So that might not be a popular opinion, but no matter what country you talk to, whether it's Russia, Chinese, Iran, whatever, there's always somebody that has a belief that the country must survive this argument. And so that's a good thing. And I think
that is a good thing.
What you're seeing, and to hand it over to Fred, is I think you're seeing those because they've been getting more attention, more monitoring. People are doing threat hunts. I see that discussion. I'm hired to do a bunch of those too. And that's the thing, is people are looking now because of this crisis. They're finding stuff. And that prosecution started 3 years ago. Like, they don't put out, that didn't happen because of this crisis. They had that case under development. They decided to publish it because of the crisis. There's a difference.
Fred, what do you think?
What I think people need to worry about, if you're thinking about everybody on this call, you need to think about those cascading effects Mike was talking about, because that's how everyone on this call will be affected. It doesn't mean that they're going to attack all of us. It means they're going to attack power systems. They're going to attack the things that allow our buildings and operations to run, which then means everybody here not only needs to get their IR plan in order, they need to have their DRBC plan in order as well, because losing the critical infrastructure will be just like having an earthquake or a tornado or something that takes out critical infrastructure. So don't think this is just a cyber thing. It could have real world, disaster recovery style implications for yourselves.
Yeah, and I want to make a quick note about what Lance is saying here about a few people pointed out that if you try to report, so a lot of junk comes out of AWS because anybody can just go throw in a VPC and start using it to scan networks. It's not hard. So reporting to AWS generally doesn't do much. Lance is the cyber analyst at the Washington State Fusion Center. And he typically takes information in the form of intake suspicious activity reports, which don't have to be kinetic. They can be logical. This actor is scanning my network and I don't like it. In the event that it is coming from a domestic source, that's when Lance gets involved, and he knows how to route information to the FBI, the Secret Service, Homeland Security, whoever can go take care of this. Because when we have stuff running out of domestic data centers, we got to knock that stuff down. There's nothing we can do about something coming out of Portugal. But when it's coming out of AWS, law enforcement can get involved. And to Lance's point, if law enforcement makes that report to AWS, they get a whole different reception. So there's that. So intake@wsfc.wa.gov. And everybody else in your respective states, and I see there's people here from all over the world, in the United States, you will have a fusion center in your state. So, you know, which is a great place to report stuff like this. And I'll tie this one off by saying the guidance coming from CISA, if you were on the phone call last week with the 900,000 people on it, what they're recommending is lowering your threshold for reporting. Okay. If you see something, say something. And so the Fusion Center is a great place to say that. You can also report it to CISA. You can report it to FBI. IC3.gov is being mentioned here. But yeah, do report. Do something weird happens. Doesn't matter. It didn't crush you, didn't do anything. You notice something weird. They will aggregate that information and form the bigger picture.
Yep.
Yeah, one thing to note, the CEO of Kaseya, who we know was involved in a major supply chain style attack last summer, he said, I contacted the FBI very first of anything. And most people have always had an aversion to doing that. He said it was the best thing that happened to Kaseya through the process. They were incredibly helpful. They were not punitive in any way. So do not be afraid to reach out to law enforcement. At the very least, let them know so they can tally up what kind of damage is happening. At the very least, they need to know this stuff is going on.
And in support of that, and hey, Lance, good to see you at least virtually again. When I was at Microsoft, I was their chief of cybercrime intelligence for the corporation. Absolutely, we had set up offices on campus, but on a different network. Blah blah blah. They can't look at the client stuff to help that communication. We hosted them at the Cybercrime Center where for this type of thing. And Microsoft has, and Amazon and Google and even Oracle have all really, I think, stepped up in a remarkable way to try and start routing that information not only from and to the government when needed, but internally. So I hear the frustration of the crew, but it's a lot better than it used to be. They're all trying at least.
Yeah. Let me get to, the what's our last slide, and then we have some questions in the chat I want to get to and some other things. Mike, you had some up to the moment stuff you wanted to go through.
Yeah, and we should all talk about these, because everybody's going to have thoughts on these. And again, let's not stray into he said, she said, but this dude is in a corner. And so, asynchronous warfare under the radar, doing things that kind of poke you underneath rather than drop a bomb on you from above is an option. That is an option. They have used that option. So that is definitely something to watch. Everybody's saying, well, where's Putin's cyber war? Well, don't count him out. Again, sanctions are costing them money. And I think we talked last time about the magnitude of the money that goes into Russia is edging up on doubling their GDP, according to my math. That's going to hurt real bad when those sanctions happen, and it's starting to hurt now. They want to recover lost revenue. This brain drain that's going on means that their economy is getting hurt. And when all the dust settles and everybody's friends again, it's going to take that much longer to bring their economy back, right? And remember, the sanctions are not going to go away for a long time. They are in place and they are going to stay. So that pain is going to stay there unless behaviors and other things change in Russia, and then we'll probably back off on those. But combined with their tech sector basically fleeing the country, this is going to make it even harder to bounce back. And then Brian, you can drill on this one a little bit. I added this after we talked this morning. Moody's is saying, well, if this does happen, it might be uninsurable. So there's that. I think all the insurance companies are tightening their exclusion language. What do you know about that?
So I'll do a short version of it. We can always talk more later. The Maersk issue was on a property policy, so it's what we call silent cyber. Everybody kind of mixes those two. It wasn't a cyber policy per se. And the war exclusion was recently in a court case judged to be only about physical, or at least primarily in one case, and that it did not exclude cyber. So as a reaction to that, and to balance how much money insurance is covering, you'll see probably edits to the cyber exclusion about war, but there's an issue of Were you a direct target, or was it a second or third effect? One example I'll give you real quick is one of my clients was impacted by ransomware at their shipper, and the shipment on the way to them sat on a dock and wasn't refrigerated. They're not a victim of a cyber attack, but the impact of a cyber attack hit them. So there's a huge complexity to insurance I won't bore you all with, but yeah, it's something that CISOs and risk officers need to talk more, and you need to understand what is a true trigger event of your policies, business interruption, business continuity, crime, or cyber, and understand what it means to you, not only for this event, but in general.
And, you know, and then, and looking at these, you know, and thinking about the insurance thing, you know, Fred, I know you advise a lot of companies who have said, you know, what do I do about insurance? You know, will insurance cover everything? You know, what are you telling people right now, you know, insurance wise?
Well, I think the thing I'm telling most people is it's way harder now to get cyber insurance. And if you do not have your house in order, you're not going to get cyber insurance. So I think this is a forcing factor, frankly, we've been waiting for a heck of a long time to say, if you want to play, you got to cover this risk and you've got to transfer it to somebody else. So the biggest thing I tell people is everybody needs to get ready, need to get your house in order, or you're not going to get cyber insurance.
Mm-hmm. And
I think it's, Mike. I just think it's interesting. You know, we have all talked about this. So maybe you don't take credit cards, you don't hold health records, you don't do financial transactions, you don't produce energy and add it to the grid. So you're essentially unregulated, right? Okay, well, those days are over, because now your insurance company is the de facto regulator for everyone. If you want your cyber insurance, you must be at least this cyber tall, full stop.
And the process you go through, and I work for, and we're a broker. We sit above all the insurance companies, so we're on the client's side of the transaction, and we're fiduciary to our clients. So the process of due diligence to get insurance, take cyber out of it. Go try and get an auto policy without airbags. Go try and get homeowners insurance and tell them you refuse to put smoke detectors in your children's bedrooms, and see how that discussion goes. And then just bring that kind of knowledge right back to the questions you're doing for cyber. If there are 11 now root causes of the spark or spread of most events, ransomware included, and if you aren't pouring MFA on everything like Frank's Red Hot Sauce, you don't even have locks on your doors, and they're not going to insure you. And it's a virtuous loop. Now it's a bureaucratic virtuous loop, and it's insurance companies. Yes, I get it. So I'm not saying it's a panacea. I'm saying it's like a good start.
Yeah. And Fred, you know, earlier, you know, we talked about, you know, whether you block Russian traffic or all of that. You know, folks here, like we said, is from, you know, are from all sorts of different industries, all sorts of different companies, municipalities. All of this is going on. You know, what should people be doing to prepare?
Yeah, well, the first thing is ensuring that any exposed vulnerabilities that are high or critical severity are addressed today, not tomorrow, today. They're actively scanning. There's enormous amount. We know scanning's going up overall. They're looking for these things, and they're going to take advantage of them. So that's the first thing. The second thing, as I always tell people, is make sure that they're monitoring as at the highest level possible during this entire cyber, you know, war event that's going on. And then the third one is ensure that their backups are, you know, have an immutable copy, as they're calling it, or fully offline copy. Follow the 3-2-1 backup rule. It's been a rule for as long as I've been doing information security, and that's a heck of a long time. And it's finally getting to the point where people realize I have no choice but to implement the 3-2-1 backup rule.
And if I could, Jake, I'm going to address Julie's question, which I know you'd throw to me anyway. So Julie, thanks. Big fan of GeekWire. I often would say,
let me just read her question for
folks. Go for it. Sorry,
because we told people they could mute the chat. So, you know, Julie says, for companies seeking cyber insurance amid increased conflict, are there any compliance standards you'd recommend? And she lists a bunch, but Brian.
And she lists ISO 27001, SOC 2, etc. For those of you playing along. So I would say, and I'll use the term, I would say the gateway drug standard is the NIST. NIST, the National Institute of Standards Technology. For those of you from other groups that might be on the call, we'll try not to use too many acronyms. So that's a reasonable set of standards. And the insurance questionnaire we, like Aon uses and many of the insurance companies use, is aligned to NIST because it's a final version of this. Car companies didn't invent seatbelts and airbags. Insurance companies did. And then like that, it wasn't something the car companies wanted to put in. Now they did because they want to protect their consumers. But that's where these things come in. The NIST standard's a great start if you got nothing else. And the questionnaire you get from your insurer about your base and your ransomware coverage and everything will actually help you with those other standards because you'll have a lot of the questions. So for those of you who are worried about that, hey, give me and the team here at Yell. We can help you with more specifics. Or Jake might put on another webinar to go into that if it's popular enough. Because
And Alan asks NIST, which one? 800, 171, 172?
The NIST CSF, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And the reason is that was developed very specifically to be applicable to any size organization in any sector because it's an outcome-driven framework. It doesn't say put this control in place. It says make this thing happen. How you do that is up to you. So it says remote access is managed. We don't care how you do that. If somebody calls you on a phone and you open up the firewall and then close it off when they're done, you're managing remote access. So, and to Brian's point, I'll just pile onto that a little bit. If you do that and you align yourself with that particular framework, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, the CSF, where insurance company comes, they're going to be asking exactly the same questions. So the NIST framework is a superset of what your insurance company wants.
And the other final two things I'll say, and I handed to Fred, sorry, to talk about a little bit too, is one, that standard is a good foundation. Now you can dress up and put on your black tie for ISO or other standards, or if you're doing anything for the government, you have to like figure out CMMC, the cybersecurity maturity models and stuff. But it won't be wasted energy. It will be something you do once that gives you all those optionality paths. So it's a great start.
And Fred, I know you have a lot of passion around NIST CSF. All your whole team uses them for security assessments. Any thoughts on that? And then I want to make sure I think we might have cut you off a little bit when you're talking about what folks need to prepare. Need to make sure you got the whole answer out there.
Yeah. Well, we always talk about a concept of the unified approach to compliance. So if you are regulated by a multitude of standards, and like if you're a hospital, you got HIPAA, you've got PCI, probably you may have other ones in there. You need to create a superset of the requirements that you need to adhere to, and build an assessment methodology that addresses all those. If you do it in that fashion, you can then allow yourself to be compliant across the organization without doing multiple assessments and multiple standards. The other thing we always say, as Mike alluded to, building a roadmap that is appropriate for your organization is a real art that people are not very good at. In other words, they'll list out a bunch of best practices. Here's that list I got from a NIST checklist, and that's what we're going to do. That may not be the most appropriate set of recommendations. So people really need to think about their staff, their budget, the management support they have, and then build a roadmap that's achievable. This is one thing that we are really strong on, is build things that are achievable, that when you come back in 2 years, everything on there is going to be in place. It's not going to be another, hey, we missed it again for another year, right? So that's, I think, the most important thing. Build things that are going to show progress. You're definitely going to move the ball down the field with.
And hey, I want to shift the conversation to something. You talked about different stakeholders there, and that brings up a big question here, which is obviously the Russia-Ukraine war is evolving every day. At first, we thought this, things have changed. The president's thing came out. How do you communicate to your employees about this? How do you communicate to your board, for those of you here from a state or local government? How do you communicate to your city council? Mike, how should people be communicating to their staff, their board, their CEO about the cyber threat here?
Yeah, well, I think that, so especially when you're talking to, in my experience, elected officials and people like that, but in the C-suite, when you're talking to executives, keep it aligned with what's actually known and what's coming out of CISA. They're talking all the time now. They're being very communicative about what's going on, both in terms of situational awareness and recommendations as to what to do. So I would say repackage what DHS says, and don't color outside those lines, because the anxiety level, we know this, we know how much our customers are calling us right now. The anxiety level is very high, and hopefully here we're tamping that down a little bit. I don't know that we're really being successful at doing that, because fact of the matter is stuff can still happen. But I think it's low likelihood that they come after our company. Why? That doesn't, because we're not a strategic value to Russia, to their strategic goals. The energy sector writ large, okay, well, that is a thing. And so let's just make sure that we understand in our business continuity planning, our disaster recovery planning, these things like cascading failures and what are our dependencies on some of these other services. So, I think, I'd keep it very laundered, aligned with what the federal government says, and be cognitive of the fact that it doesn't have to happen directly to us. We can be collateral damage. And so we should probably be a little prepped for that.
Brian, what do you think?
And I'll start with the soundbite that we developed when we were in the green room. Keep calm and soldier on in cyber.
Yeah.
This is a crisis. It's not a crisis for all of, like, every single person that's called that's a CISO of a bank. Nothing's changed. Every person on here who's the CISO of a local government, nothing's changed. Yes, there's a new topic. Yeah, there's some more potential tsunami waves caused by this, but those tsunami waves were in the ocean anyway. They were coming sooner or later. Use the time and energy to bring like the calm firefighter and executives you all are to a discussion that is fraught with unfortunate, horrible levels of human impact and hyperbole. But at the end of the day, every police officer looks for suspicious activity in every state, regardless of what the threat level of the United States is that day. Bring that same kind of everyday professionalism here, and I think we'll be fine. And the other thing I'll say is, absolutely, I run some of the tabletops from Fortune 50 to 5 people companies, and so does Michael and others. Use this opportunity, either if you can't hire somebody, to individually have a rational discussion.
So
and from there,
so there's a question there in the chat that I'm gonna make a little different here. Should we be stuffing extra dollars in the mattresses versus banking? Have serious. So what that question indicates is, there's a level of trepidation, a level of stress going on where
Personal
people are
anxiety.
like, personal anxiety and business anxiety, right? If all the ATMs stop working, or if I can't get money, or sure, I recognize nothing's changed, Brian, day to day, but at the same time,
Right.
there could be a big supply chain attack.
So if the ATMs and Visa and MasterCard and everything all don't work, if you don't have the water with you, I don't know where you're going to get it. And if you're going out with money and no gun, then that's going to be another problem. So your emergency.
I'm sure that's not going to freak anybody out. I'm sure.
No, but here's the thing: is your emergency response plan for a fire is the same as one for arson. The cause of the fire really kind of doesn't matter at that point. So I meant to use humor in a way that hopefully deflates that, but is have your plans, your BCP, your auditing, your triggering, your on-call incident response. Make sure that you're spending your time and energy, like Fred said, to have a plan that's not only achievable in 2 years, that the first 3 months addresses putting a lock on the front door. You can worry about putting a camera in the living room later. Like, make it reasonable to implement in a Lego block fashion or whatever. I have small kids. Take this time and do it the way you've always done it. And that's what shows them we have our hands around it.
Fred, thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, this is an opportunity. I think it was mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, to raise the level. Just everything, a rising tide should raise all boats. Everyone is being forced to get better. You need to get better along with the rest of the world, because that's what's happening. And if you don't, then you're going to become a much more attractive target, because you're going to have, a weaker set of defenses than the next guy. So you need to let your management, your board, your investors, whoever it is, know that things are changing. We're being forced to change, and we need to change along with the times, or we're going to be at a disadvantage.
Yeah, it's it's interesting. I talked to an IT director was it last week before last, who said to me, I we have pretty good security. I had some budget asks that didn't get approved this year on security. You know, is it too ghoulish to use this to go get those? Because now my CFO is asking me all sorts of questions about, oh, is our security good enough? Mike, how do you see that?
Don't let a good crisis go to waste. I mean, if this, forms the, ups the pucker factor for the executives that approve budget, so be it, right? I mean, because you made the request because you needed the controls. You still need the controls. This thing is going on now, which makes this now hit the radar of the executives. Yeah, use that. But, a couple of other things here. When we say supply chain attack and cascading failures and things like that, we're kind of talking big scale. But you can also be the unlocked window that is used to attack your business partners, and it can come back the other way. So right now, all this talk about supply chain security is starting to really come into the spotlight right now. So, map out your supplies that are important. Okay, like if you have a source for semiconductor chips, okay, that's probably going to be near the top of your list, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Good luck with that.
Well, 'cause a lot of the raw materials come out of Ukraine. If you all don't know that, a lot of literally the metals, the heavy metals and other things that go into that come out of the Ukraine. There's a whole actual physical supply chain issue. Sorry, please continue.
No, that's good. And so, at this point, it's a little late for detailed risk management, but have conversations with your business partners, and especially the ones that are key to your supply chain, your company's supply chain. And make sure that you have an agreement. If something happens to you, we need to know. And right now we can have those conversations because this is on everybody's mind. And the second thing I'll say is, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And if we see the signal of the stuff starting to go down, like if we see critical infrastructure being impacted, okay, it's time to pull the trigger on some extraordinary measures. And one of those is stop letting your people use your equipment for their personal use. Okay, personal use on a personal device will save you. That takes a whole big chunk out of your attack surface, and it's an easy policy-based thing to do. Don't even need to enforce it. Just tell everybody. Just use your phone for Facebook. Gmail lives on your phone. Don't access personal messaging services through our technology because they're used for avenues in by bad actors. So I'll say those two things, right? Keep an eye on your suppliers. Now's the time to have the conversation. We was all talking about supply chain, and you really may want to think about how you're letting your users use your technology for their personal use, because that is a big term in the attack surface.
Here's my bit of advice on going back to the CFO to address the question. I'll do it quickly. Is yes, go back to them and ask for budget, but only ask for 30%. The most important things that this enhanced awareness lets you achieve this year. But explain to them it's spend once, benefit many. You're spending it to avoid the Russia issue and qualify for better insurance and for the due diligence that's going to come from your customers, from your partners, from others. Go back with a more focused but urgent, slightly urgent, but more universal approach. And I bet it'll probably land better with the board.
Yeah. Yep. So we're going to get to final thoughts and answer one more question here in a second. First, couple of items. Number one, this is what we do. So a lot of the things that they've mentioned today, some of the things Brian's team does for Aon and Strauss Friedberg, some of the stuff we do. This is the slide of what we do, which is the policy and compliance, the vCISO work. Pen testing. The thing that the government talked about was making sure you're monitoring. Obviously, we have 2 security operations centers, and we monitor networks 24/7. Up here are things that Fred was talking about, which is the response planning. Make sure you have a response plan ready right now, and make sure you're doing tabletop exercises. These are really, really important things. The other thing I want to mention is we really appreciate folks coming for these. We want to make sure we get better. I'm going to put a link in the chat for a survey. We really appreciate your feedback on these. Also, when you take the survey, for everyone who takes the survey, you can either get a gift card or donate that gift card to Girls Who Code, because we all know that we need to develop more security talent. And they do a great job of that. So I'll put a link to that in the chat. And while we do final thoughts here, here's ways to get in touch with us. My email address is the vanity one, just first name, because I'm the vain one, but there's Mike's, there's Brian's as well. So let's do some final thoughts here. Fred, final thoughts?
Yeah, well, Mike had just mentioned something about it's too late to do detailed risk management. And I'm going to say just the opposite. I think now is the opportune time of all time to do detailed risk management. I mean, you've got their attention, you've got the floor, take advantage of it. Now is the time to dig deep, figure out exactly where you're at and start implementing those critical risk reductions.
Mike, final thoughts.
So final thoughts, just to summarize a few things that came up and just to kind of, accentuate them a little bit. Resilience preparation. Make sure you can take a punch and get back up off the mat. Okay. And that's like backups, and you may want to increase log retention, things like that. Okay. So resilience prep. Okay. Number 2, people. All right. Your people are the credit unions and the banks are saying the phishing from Russia is going off scale. Why? It's because the control that will reliably fail is the one between your ears. Talk to people, and if you can, shut them out of Gmail and other things while they're sitting on their work computer. Number 3, CISA keeps putting out vulnerabilities that are the ones that are commonly attacked by these actors. So if you have any of those facing the internet, you need to go through that list and you need to fix that right away, because that's another way in. Yes, the easier way is to get somebody to bite on something and go give up a password, right? But they still break in using vulnerability exploit. And then number 4, again, your suppliers, your key things that keep your business running, talk to those people, because if something goes down there, you need to know.
Brian, final thoughts.
Well, thanks everybody for taking time out of your day today. And I agree with Fred and Mike. I understand you agree too. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Yep. Today's good too. Just get your risk management started, make it holistic, and you will bring more of your board members in. Reach out to your CFO and explain how this will stop fraud, not just Russian hackers they don't care about. Make it that longitudinal career-wise discussion for them, and you will actually be the better CISO, the better security individual. Tsunamis and rain will come. You have a plan for all the weather. That's what they're looking for. And thanks.
Yeah. Hey, and one other thing that I mentioned in the chat earlier, but want to make sure we say out loud is Chrome. Make sure you update Chrome. Make sure you tell everyone in your organization to update Chrome immediately. Our Security Operations Center actually sent out a notice to all of our customers.
And Edge. Aletha's right. And Edge.
And Edge. Yep. If you want that notice that we sent out to our customers, shoot me an email, jake@criticalinsight.com. Don't forget to take the survey. I'll also put my email address in the chat, but I'm happy to forward you what we sent our customers, so you can send that to your whoever, your bosses, your customers, your employees, your whatever. Thank you everybody for joining us. Brian, thanks for being here. Mike, Fred, thank you as well. As I said last time, we will do these when events warrant. If something else happens, we'll be here. We'll send out a notice. If you haven't signed up for our webinars, go to our website and sign up for Mike's Daily Blast, or send us a note, and we'll make sure you signed up. You get signed up. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Have a great week, and I hope it's a quiet one. Yeah. It's not starting out that way. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.